I was 29 years old when my life shattered into pieces. I had been happily married for 3 years to Adam, my high school sweetheart. We had two beautiful sons, aged 4 and 5, and everything seemed perfect. We were on the verge of buying a house, dreaming of a future together, until the day Adam blindsided me with a bombshell. One evening, out of nowhere, he told me that he wanted to be single. He claimed that after being together since high school, he needed to explore the world, live life to the fullest, and shed the burden of our family. The man I thought I knew, the man I had built my entire life around, said he wasn't happy. He insisted it wasn't about me or the kids. It was just his need to be free, to find himself. I was heartbroken. He even suggested I leave our kids behind and travel the world to find my own happiness abandoned. Then just like he was abandoning us. How could he say that? I was furious. How could he choose a selfish, self-indulgent life over his own flesh and blood? But he wasn't willing to reconsider. He wanted a divorce, and his mind was set. He walked out, leaving me with two little boys who deserved more than a father who wanted nothing to do with them. The pain of watching him leave was unbearable. He left with no remorse, no second thoughts. Our divorce was quick and painless on his side. He didn't want anything. He didn't even fight for visitation rights. At first, he came to visit the kids occasionally, but it became clear that he was simply trying to erase the past. He didn't want to be reminded of his family. Even those visits stopped, and I later found out why. He had joined a group of men who believed relationships and family were shackles. They had brainwashed him into thinking his life with me and our kids was a weight he needed to escape. He wasn't leaving for a new love or a better life. He was leaving for an ideology that promised freedom and adventure. I didn't know it then, but I later found out that Adam had joined a cult-like group that glorified a life of constant travel and partying, free from all commitments. The man I loved had thrown away everything, his family, his children, just to fit into a group that fed his fragile ego. He didn't care about the mess he left behind. I was only 29 when Adam left, and the weight of his departure felt like it shattered my entire existence. I never saw it coming. One moment, we were planning our future, making little plans for our kids, and the next, he was gone, leaving a gaping hole in our lives. I could never have prepared myself for the aftermath of his decision. The pain of watching him walk away was nothing compared to the devastation that followed. When Adam left, it wasn't just his absence that cut deep. It was the aftermath, the wreckage of our once beautiful family. I was left with two young boys who couldn't understand why their father had disappeared without a trace. I tried to explain, but they were too young, too innocent to grasp the cruel reality of what had happened. Their cries at night, asking for daddy, tore me apart. The emptiness of their little faces, looking up at me with wide eyes full of confusion, was unbearable. They didn't understand why their father had abandoned them, and I didn't have any good answers to give. The first few months were the hardest. I was a single mother trying to juggle everything, working, caring for my boys, maintaining the house. I was drowning in responsibilities. The guilt of not being able to give my children the family they deserved haunted me daily. Adam's departure left me to carry the weight of our entire life on my shoulders, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to make everything work. I'd wake up exhausted, but I had to keep pushing forward because there was no one else. I thought the pain of his absence would subside with time, but it only got worse. The loneliness grew deeper. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what went wrong. How could someone I trusted with everything, someone who had promised to love me forever, just walk out on us without a second thought? The bitterness, the resentment, it was overwhelming. But it wasn't just the emotional toll, it was the practical one. I had to take on both roles, mother and father. I had to explain to my boys why their dad wasn't around to celebrate birthdays or attend school plays. I had to become both their protector and their caretaker, trying to fill the void that Adam left behind. But no matter how much love I gave them, no matter how many hugs or kisses I showered them with, it didn't fill the space their father's absence created. The worst part came when Adam started to show no interest in our children. At first, he'd visit, but soon even that stopped. He promised me that he would still be there for them, that we would be a family even if we weren't together. But those promises were empty. Every time he broke his word, the hurt deepened. My boys were growing up without their father, and they had no idea why. I could see the confusion in their eyes when they asked for him, and I had no answers to give. The worst blow came when I discovered that Adam had completely cut ties with us. He didn't want anything to do with his children. He was too busy living a life of constant travel, self-indulgence, and reckless freedom. He joined a group of people who had twisted his mind, convincing him that the family life he'd once known was suffocating. And so he chose to embrace this new selfish existence with no regard for the life and the family he'd left behind. He didn't even bother to reach out to our sons, who still held hope that their father would return. But each day that passed without a word from him made it clearer he was never coming back. The scars left behind by his departure were deep. My boys struggled with feelings of abandonment, and I could see the toll it took on their hearts. They grew up with the absence of a father, always feeling something was missing, and I couldn't fix it. My own heart was broken, and no amount of time could heal the wounds Adam's decision had inflicted. I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered family, but the damage was irreversible. It was a cold, bitter evening when Adam showed up at my door after months of silence, and I couldn't even believe my own eyes. For so long, I had convinced myself that he was gone for good, that I had finally built a life without him, however painful and lonely it was. But there he was, standing in the doorway, looking almost like a stranger. His once familiar face now held a cold emptiness, and the smile he gave me was nothing like the one I had once known. It was as though the man who had walked out of our lives was nothing like the one who returned. The moment I saw him, a wave of anger and confusion flooded me. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of emotions rising within me. I didn't know whether I wanted to scream or collapse into his arms. After all this time, after all the pain and heartbreak he had caused, how could he just walk back into our lives as though nothing had happened? How could he act as though the wreckage of our family didn't matter? His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he said, "I made a mistake. I want to come back. I've changed." The words hung in the air like a cruel joke. Changed? How could he think that the years of neglect, of abandoning his children and me, could just be erased with a few words? I looked at Het, the man who had destroyed everything we had worked for, and felt a sickening mixture of disbelief and fury. It was as though he thought he could pick up where we left off, that he could walk back into our lives without consequences. But there were consequences. There were wounds that no words or apologies could heal. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to know about his so-called change or whatever new life he had built for himself. I was not the same person I had been when he left, and neither were my children. His absence had shattered us, and his return, though it stirred old emotions, was not the answer. I looked at my two boys still hurting, still scarred from his abandonment, and felt a deep protectiveness surge within me. They were my priority now, not the man who had turned his back on them. But Adam insisted. He said he wanted to try again to make things right. His eyes were filled with desperation, but I saw something else there too: selfishness. He wasn't asking to fix the family. He was asking to fix his own guilt. He had left us when we needed him the most, and now he wanted to come back, as if everything could be patched up with a few words and a promise to try. I found myself at a crossroads. The desire to protect my children, to shield them from more heartache, clashed with the old feelings I had once had for him. I wanted to believe that people could change, that maybe this time Adam had truly learned something. But deep down I knew better. How could I trust him after everything he had done? It wasn't just about him coming back. It was about the storm he brought with him. His presence stirred up emotions I had buried for so long: guilt, fear, love, and anger, all fighting for control. And every day he stayed, it was as if the wounds of the past opened up again, raw and bleeding. I knew that we couldn't just go back to what we once were. I had spent months trying to heal, trying to build something new for my boys, and I couldn't let him come in and destroy all the progress we had made. The more I looked at him, the more I realized that his return would only stir the storm inside me. The damage had already been done, and nothing would ever be the same. Adam's return felt like a curse, not a blessing. It wasn't a second chance for our family, it was a test, and I wasn't sure we were ready for it. Would I let him back into our lives, knowing how much he had hurt us? Or would I close the door forever and finally let go of a past that had already left us broken? The decision was mine, but the consequences were unimaginable. As Adam stood there, his eyes full of regret, I felt an overwhelming rush of emotions flood through me, none of them good. My chest tightened, my breath short, and for a moment, I couldn't even find the words. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him how he could possibly expect me to forgive him, to take him back after everything. But instead, I stood frozen, caught between the woman I had been before his betrayal and the woman I had become after his departure, a woman hardened by loss, by pain, by the cruel reality of having to raise 2 children alone. I'd spent countless sleepless nights thinking about this moment. I had imagined it 1,000 times in my head, his apology, his tears, his promises to change, but nothing could prepare me for the raw intensity of seeing him again. His presence felt like a weight on my chest, pressing down, suffocating me. My mind screamed at me to push him away, to tell him to leave, to never come back. Yet, part of me, the part that was still vulnerable and broken, wanted to listen. Maybe, just maybe, this time he had changed. Maybe he had learned the lesson he needed to learn, and we could rebuild everything. But the cynicism that had taken root in my heart told me that was a fantasy, a lie I had told myself to survive. I crossed my arms over my chest, an instinctive act of self-protection, and glared at him. You think you can just walk back into our lives? My voice shook, but I refused to let him see how deeply I was hurting. You think that after everything you've done, you can just waltz in here and fix everything with a few words? The anger boiled inside me, making my blood run hot. The memories of sleepless nights, of watching my children suffer because of his absence, all of it came rushing back in a painful, heart-wrenching wave. How could he expect me to just forgive and forget? How could he expect us to be a family again after he had shattered everything we had? His eyes flickered with guilt, and I could see that he was struggling to find the right words. But I didn't want to hear them. His words had no weight anymore. It didn't matter how many times he apologized. It didn't matter if he promised the world. He had already broken it. The pain of his abandonment was still so raw, still so fresh in my mind, that even his presence felt like a betrayal all over again. What about the kids? I demanded, my voice rising now. What about them, Adam? They've been through hell because of you. Do you even realize the damage you've caused? You left us. You chose to walk away when we needed you the most. His face softened, but I could see the defensiveness in his eyes. He was preparing for the same tired excuses, the same promises that had been empty the last time. My heart hardened, and the final sliver of hope I had been clinging to withered away. This wasn't about a reunion. It wasn't about healing or second chances. It was about him trying to fix his conscience, to soothe his own guilt, while ignoring the real cost of his actions. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the words that came next were sharp, cutting through the air like daggers. I don't know who you are anymore, Adam. The man I loved, he's gone, and I'm not sure I even want him back. The silence that followed was suffocating. His face paled, and I could see the hurt in his eyes, but it was too late. I had made my decision. No amount of pleading, no amount of promises could erase the damage he had done. I turned away from him, my heart breaking once again. I couldn't let him back in. Not like this. Not after everything. The courtroom was suffocating. The tension thick in the air as I sat there, my heart hammering in my chest. Every word that passed through the lawyers' mouths felt like a blade being twisted in my gut. I had fought so hard for this moment, and yet, now that it was here, it was nothing like I'd imagined. The hope that I had once clung to, the hope that we might find some way to salvage this mess of a life, had evaporated the moment Adam had walked out the door. The man sitting across from me now, the one I had loved and trusted, seemed like a stranger. His eyes held no remorse, no regret for the pain he had caused. Instead, he sat there cool and distant, as if none of it mattered. As if the life we had built together meant nothing. I felt my hands tremble, gripping the cold surface of the table, as the judge's voice pierced through the fog of my thoughts. "The divorce is granted," he announced, his words like a death sentence. A finality that couldn't be undone. I had expected it, of course. I had prepared myself for this outcome for months, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like a physical blow. My heart sank, and a bitter taste filled my mouth. The room felt smaller, more suffocating, as the legal details were read out. The custody arrangements for the children, the division of assets, the alimony, it was all so clinical, so detached. There was no room for emotions here. No space for the pain, the sacrifice, the years of love and commitment that had once defined our relationship. It was reduced to numbers, to percentages, to a set of cold, impersonal facts. My lawyer spoke briefly, offering reassurance, but I barely heard him. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, rage, sadness, disbelief. Adam's betrayal had destroyed me in ways I couldn't fully articulate, and now this legal battle was only confirming the irreparable damage that had been done. I had worked so hard to hold everything together, to protect my children from the fallout, but now it felt like I was losing everything. And Adam? He sat there, his face impassive, as though this was just another business transaction to him. The hardest part was yet to come. The judge's final words about child custody left me numb. I would have full custody of the children, which was a victory, yes, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a burden and responsibility I had never asked for, but one I had no choice but to bear. Adam had barely fought for them, barely put up any resistance when the custody battle was decided. He had abandoned us, and now he was absent in every sense, not even fighting for his own flesh and blood. As the proceedings wrapped up, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. This was it. This was my new reality. The life I had once dreamed of, a life with a partner, a family, was now nothing more than a shattered memory. I was left with the pieces, and the enormity of what that meant hit me like a ton of bricks. The divorce was final. The chapter was closed. But the scars, the emotional toll, would last far longer than any legal decree could ever define. I was no longer just a wife. I was a mother, a single parent, and the weight of that responsibility loomed over me, reminding me that there was no going back.